um, in the year for 2021. And Jairo Guisa, who is our diversity and equity specialist at Regional Center of the East Bay, will be your presenter for today. And we will also have questions, comments, which you can put in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and share those and we'll unmute you. What the purpose of this is to really hear from our community, especially to hear about solutions and ways that we can support people and have as much equity in our community in terms of services provided as we can. So Jairo, you can take it away now. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to share with us this information together. So we will be looking at numbers and that will indicate purchase of service expenditure for the year, as Lisa already mentioned, for the year 2020-2021. We're required by law to have to meet with the community to present this data, to provide this information to the community in an accessible way. That's why we have charts to make it more accessible, and also to hear from you. So it will be a conversation with the community, and that's what we're going to do. There is this presentation will be posted on our website, just like the presentations from previous years. You can find them in the transparency section of the Regional Center of the East Bay website. And so we have a number of an amount of information and a number of slides. So I'm not going to repeat everything that is there, but you can access this presentation again on our website if you want to look at the information that is contained in the presentation. So we will be looking at expenditures, purchase of service expenditures. This report doesn't include services that consumers may have received from different sources, different from the regional center. So the report will only reflect expenditures incurred from Regional Center of the East Bay. We don't know how we will be analyzing, and obviously that's part of the conversation that we're going to have, is what is the impact, to what extent you know the impact that the pandemic had on the provision of services. If you have a family member, or if you work with consumers, Regional Center of the East Bay consumers, then perhaps in your experience, you may have noticed something that would be worth to share today in terms of the effects of the pandemic and other factors, and the report that we're going to see. In order for us to read numbers in a way that is more, that will help us understand better the information, we will take into account that expenditures are higher for adults and also for residents. Adults who live out of home spend more money than individuals who live at home, or for other ages. For instance, the expenditure for a child 0 to 3 will be significantly different than the expenditures for adults who live out of home. We need to take that into account when we look at percentages, because the information can be not necessarily accurate when we compare information related to different age groups. So I'm going to start to share my screen and then show you those numbers and those charts. And then at the end, we will have a conversation. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear if you have questions. We're here to answer as much as we can. And that's what we're gonna do. So the first image that you see is the community, the number of individuals in our community, in the regional center community. This shows by ethnicity of race the number of people. We are in the year 2021, we served 24,481 individuals. 24,481 individuals. Out of this group, the largest group is composed of the white population with 6,273 consumers, clients. Out of those 6,273, 3,684 are adults. That will have an impact on expenditures, as I mentioned earlier. The second largest group is the Hispanic population with 5,847 individuals. And look how that population is distributed. The largest group in the Hispanic population are ages 3 to 21. That means that could help us, and we are all entitled to do our own interpretation on these numbers, but this can help us project in the future, in the near future, what the population would look like. In terms of other races, we have 4,622 Asian consumers. Also, for that group, the largest group is in the ages 3 to 21. And another group are the African Americans, 3,763 total. And the largest group are the adults with 2,082 consumers in that age group. So if you look at this chart, you can actually spend quite some time just looking at those numbers and see projections and see also how the age will impact expenditures. And we will see that reflected in the slides that we're gonna see next. So this is just a chart that shows us the distribution of individuals by age 0 to 3. 32% of that population is Hispanic. The second largest group is the other ethnicity, 23.7%. The white population in the 0 to 3 age group is 14.4%. Black or African American 8%, and Asian 20.7%. Just to have a graphic, it's just the same information as provided in the previous slide, except that here is more visual for those of us who need to see this kind of illustrations. Ages 3 to 21, again, you see the number of Hispanics, 28%. For the white population is 19%, Asian 22%, African American 13%, ages 3 to 21. When we look at percentages, and we will be looking at some charts later showing percentages, it is important to notice that when we compare groups, we compare the largest groups, since small groups like the American Indian or Native or Alaska Native, those are under 1% of the population of the regional center, at least for this age 3 to 21, and actually across ages the population is under 1%. Same thing with the native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. So when there is, when we look at percentages, perhaps the numbers will not necessarily reflect the information that we want to look at, because expenditure on one or two consumers will shown in percentages will seem like a huge expenditure when actually it is not that huge. By adults, as we stated earlier, the largest population is the white population, with 38% of consumers being identified as white, and the African American, Black population 21%, Hispanic 16%, Asians 15%. This chart gives us an idea of how the general population is distributed in the two counties in our catchment area. In Alameda County, the largest population is white with 33%. The second largest population, the Asians, with 28%. The third largest population, Hispanics, 22%, and the Black population with 11%. If we go to Contra Costa, you will see that that almost half of the population, 45%, are white. The second largest population in Contra Costa are the Hispanics. Then we have the Asians, 15%, and the Black, 9%. This also gives us, helps us have a context where the population at the regional center, how it is distributed. Now, this chart will we're comparing the population at the regional center by ethnicity in the last 2 years. 2019, 2020 is represented by the blue bar. And these are the numbers. You can see that for the white population in 2020, 2021, the population is 25.62%, which is smaller than the previous year with 26-29%. So these are not necessarily substantial changes in the population, but it is something to notice because this could reflect also how the population moves in California. So they can move from the Bay Area for various reasons. The Hispanic population, actually, there was also a reduction from 23.92% to 23.88% in the last year. And you can look at the other numbers. In the Asian population, the opposite happened. In 2019-20, there was 18.41% Asian consumers. And in the last year, 2020-2021, 18%, 18 and 87%, which is a change. Again, these are not substantial changes, but nonetheless changes that we can look at. The expenditures by ethnicity. I'm sorry, I cannot see here. This is taking away. Okay, this expenditure for consumers under 3 by ethnicity. For a white consumer identified, for a consumer identified as white in the regional center, the expenditure was $3,816. And for African Americans, $4,113. And as you can see, there are differences. These are not huge differences in expenditures, and especially for the largest groups, 3,572 for Hispanic, and for Asians, 3,631. If you're taking notes, or if you want to, at the end, to repeat any of this piece of information, please let me know and we will do that. For ages 3 to 21, the expenditure again, look, 8,564 for a white consumer, 9,116 for a Black African-American consumer, $6,904 for Native Hawaiian, for an Asian, 6,037. This is an age where most of the expenditures are paid for or are taken care of in the school district. And that is one of the reasons why we see not a huge expenditure during this age 3 to 21. Expenditure for ages 22 and up, this is for adults. And you can see the difference in the amount spent in the last year, how this compares to expenditures for ages 0 to 3 or 3 to 21. Now we're talking about $55,475 for a white consumer. For a Hispanic consumer, the expenditure was $28,037. For an African-American, $40,414. And for an Asian consumer, $33,930. So these are, you can now start seeing significant differences, and we can have a discussion around your perception or your interpretation of these numbers. Again, when we talk about money spent on individuals, this report doesn't necessarily tell us the quality of the services, the experience that families had when they access these services, and so on. This only tells us amounts of money that were spent on consumers. For all ages by ethnicity, this is how much money was spent in the last year. $35,696 for a white consumer, compared to $10,761 for a Hispanic, $26,026 for African American, and $14,400 for an Asian consumer. This is all ages by ethnicity. As I said earlier, when we compare all ages, we need to take into consideration that expenditures are increased depending on the age of the consumer. And so that's why we provided those numbers at the beginning, so that we take that into account when reading these numbers. This chart shows us a comparison between, it's just the same slides that we looked at earlier, same information for ages 22 and up, the blue bar, the ages 3 to 21, the terracotta color bar, and for ages 0 to 3, the gray bar. So it's same information, but now we're looking at comparing how money was spent on those 3 age groups. Now this is the expenditure by diagnosis. As you can see, the largest amount of money spent was on individuals with intellectual disability, $37,202. And if you are a family member attending this meeting, perhaps you can think of your loved one or yourself and see where you fall in this category. For cerebral palsy, $29,822, or individuals with epilepsy, 35,509. Category 5, 19,537. Autism, 13,465. And for individuals in the category other, $3,368. Look at the numbers, and I'm trying to go a little slow so you can remember. But again, if you need to look at some of those numbers, I can go back and show the slide. This is an important piece of information that perhaps also would be interesting to have a conversation about. These are adults living out of home by ethnicity or race. So we have already established that the largest expenditure happens with adults and also with place of residence. And these are adults who live out of home. How many adults live out of home? 60% of the white population identify as who are adults and are identified as white live out of home. That will have an impact on expenditures. Then you have 26% of the Hispanic population and the same level of the Asian, 26%, and 52% of the African American consumers who are adults, they live out of home. I have, if you look at previous years, you will notice that this pattern keeps pretty much repeating itself year after year. So a conversation about this probably we would be worth to have not only today, but in our conversations about establishing equitable systems that respond to cultural and linguistic needs. This doesn't necessarily reflect linguistic needs, but perhaps it's one of those cultural aspects that need to be looked into. So these are the individuals who live at home, and we're comparing the overall population compared to ages 3 to 21. If you look at the terracotta bars, those represent ages 3 to 21. You can see that more than 90% of the population live at home during that age, 3 to 21. And the Hispanic is 99%, for instance. The white is 96%. The majority of the consumers in the ages 3 to 21 live at home. When we compare the overall population, again, we see that difference. 63% of the overall population identified as white live at home. And in the Hispanic population, that is 93%. So again, we see a huge gap between that could represent cultural, different cultural approaches to living arrangements for consumers of regional center. The Asian population is 91%, and the Black population, 70% live at home when we look at the overall population. Expenditures for those living, I can't see this, sorry.
Out of home by ethnicity.
Okay, you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, by ethnicity of race. This is, I warned you at the beginning, and I said when we look at these charts, we need to take into account the number of consumers. For instance, you see a huge expenditure in the native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, but actually this is a small number, so we don't want to disregard that, but we want to look at the largest groups to see, because this is where the disparities I think are more significant. So for white individuals, 82,958, For Hispanics, 68,567. For African Americans, 65,534. And for Asians, $93,126. Reading this information is complex because we have to go back to look at numbers and compare that to percentages so that we can have a more accurate approach to the reality. These are expenditures for adults living at home by ethnicity. Again, $13,752 for a white consumer. For a Hispanic, 13,598, a little similar. For African Americans, 1,379. And for an Asian, 12,986. So when we see these numbers, especially when we're comparing, these are, now we're talking about adults living at home by ethnicity. So then it's always legitimate to ask ourselves why. And that's why having the conversation with community and families will help us have a better understanding of these numbers. These are the language for all ages. The largest populations identify English as the main language, the primary language, 72.31%. The second largest language spoken at the regional center is the Spanish, 1588%, almost 16%. And then we have a number of other languages like Cantonese, below 2%, Mandarin below 2%, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Mien, less than 1%. But when we talk about equity, then there is really no small numbers, but everyone who comes to the regional center, we are committed to providing the best experience possible and the best access to the services that families need, regardless of numbers. These are the expenditure. Can you read that for me, Lisa, please? Expenditure for—
Yes, this is expenditures for all ages by language.
For all ages by language. And I apologize, unfortunately, there is a bar that blocks this
Title,
identifications, title, yeah. So in the expenditure by language, we see that for a person who identify English as the primary language, the expenditure was $24,102. If you compare that to a client who identifies Spanish as the primary language, the expenditure was $8,314. And the same goes for other languages. For Cantonese, $19,132, Mandarin, Vietnamese, $9,663, Mandarin, $15,622, and so on. So we need to look at this also. This is another variable that we put together, language and ethnicity, then and place of residence, then we can have again a better understanding of all these circumstances that translate into expenditures. This is expenditures for
under 3 by language.
Expenditure for under 3 by language. For an English individual, $3,674. Spanish speakers, $3,520. For a Cambodian, the expenditure was $16,762. So, you know, this, we cannot explain this. We have to have conversations looking at cases to totally have a better understanding. Expenditure for residence type independent living adults by ethnicity of race. The expense was $55,563 for a white consumer, $35,755 for a Hispanic. For an Asian, $60,793, and for African American, $40,013. Now we're going to talk about utilization. So we will show in the next chart, we will show how not all the services that were authorized were necessarily used. And that goes actually across all ethnicity and age groups. So we always ask that question to the community. Why do you think that is? I'm not going to tell you what the answer has been in previous years, but when we have the conversation at the end of the presentation, we will talk about that. But mostly we want to hear from you. Why do you think not 100% of the services authorized were used? For instance, for the adult white population, 75.6% of authorized services were used, not 100%. For Hispanics, adults, it was 71.9%. For African Americans, 71. You know, above the 70s, 79%, 72, 75 for the adult population. We want to hear your feedback and your experience so that you can tell us what could be one of the reasons or multiple reasons for this to happen. And same thing happens for ages 3 to 21 are represented in the terracotta color bars, and the under 3 population represented in the blue bars. Look at the numbers. Now these are consumers with no purchase of service. That means that these individuals during the year 2020-2021 did not receive a service that was paid by the regional center. That means regardless of whether services were authorized or not, they did not receive services. And this is an important, also another important piece of our conversation, why this happened. That doesn't mean, again, no purchase of service doesn't necessarily imply that consumers did not receive services. It only shows that individuals may not have did not receive services paid for by the regional center of the East Bay during that year. So individuals by ethnicity or race, these are percentages of individuals who did not receive services from the regional center. We also have to clarify that one of the main services from the regional center is case management, and every consumer certainly received case management. A case manager was assigned to their cases and they work with them, but we're talking about expending in money that is not represented in this service. So in the white population, there was 14.2% of the adult population. The gray bars will show 14.2% of white individuals not receiving any service from the regional center. If we look at the ages, population ages 3 to 21, again, the numbers are very similar, but in any aspect that we compare, the numbers seem to be a little similar, at least above the 50% of the population, except here for the Hispanic population, 48.6% of the consumers ages 3 to 21 did not receive any service from regional center. Also, comparing with adults where the most of the expenditure happens, then we can see that 22% of adults who identify as Hispanic did not receive services from regional center, and 24.8% of Asian consumers did not receive services from the regional center of the East Bay. Now we're comparing 2 years of individuals who did not receive services from regional center. We saw an increase in almost every group except the American Indian or Alaska Native, which is a small group in the regional center. But if you look for 2019, 2020, there was 11.4% in the white population. In 2020, 2021, that group increased by to 14.2%. For Hispanics, it was from 18.7% to 22%. For African Americans, 12.6% to 15.4%, and for Asians, 22.3% to 24.8%. These are more significant changes, significant population. We all have our own interpretation, but I think we better hear from you and get to know why there was this increase in individuals who did not receive services. We certainly can think that the pandemic has a lot to do with it, since some programs were closed, some individuals may not have received services because of that. Consumers with no POS by a diagnosis, the gray bar represent adults, the orange ages 3 to 21 and under 3 represented by the blue bars. For autism, ages 3 to 21, 55.3% of individuals did not receive any service. For category 5, 53.8%. If we look at the adult population, then for category 5, 20.4% of individuals did not receive services who are in this category 5. For cerebral palsy, 16.6%. Intellectual disability, 15.3%. And I hope you can also see those numbers so that you can also identify your loved one if you are a family member, or if you have experiences that you can share as of why this happened. Consumers with no POS by language. For adults, again, the orange bars, and for ages 3 to 21, the blue bars. We have large populations actually who did not receive services. For instance, in the Mien group, 57.1% of adults did not receive services. Same thing happened for other groups like Cambodian, a large group, half of the individuals who are adults did not receive any service during that year. And for the Spanish population, it was 21.6%. Cantonese, 22.6% of adults. I'm just looking at adults, and I don't want to go over each one of these bars, but just to have an idea that language also affected if you look at the individuals who identify English as the primary language, 17%. 17% certainly is less than 21, 22, or 60% like in the Cambodian case. But again, look at numbers, but look at not only percentages, but also at the numbers. Adults with no POS by language. Here we have actually we're comparing year to year, and the orange or terracotta bars represent the year that we're showing data for, 2020, 2021. And we're comparing how did it change from one year to the next. So in the Mien population, there was no change. 57% of the population of the adults did not receive services in both years. For the Spanish population, it was 18%, 18.6 in 2019-20, compared to 21.6%. There was an increase in the number of individuals who identify Spanish, who identify Spanish as their primary language, and who are adults that did not receive any service. If we compare that to the English population, 13.7% in 2019-2020 compared to 17% in 2020-2021. And if you're interested in looking at other languages, Cambodian 47.1 compared to 50, an increment in that number. Korean 16.7 to 20.5.
Jairo,
Yes.
in the interest of time, I'm thinking maybe we have these slides posted, maybe we can go to answering some questions or getting feedback.
Yeah.
So that we have enough time to do that.
And that was the last one, actually.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear your feedback on this. You know that there are some efforts that are being made to address these issues. And some of those, especially, I would like to highlight the fact that there are some initiatives statewide. One of those is the implicit bias training. And Lisa can explain a little bit more later, but it is a training focused on individuals that are involved in eligibility and other regional center staff. There's also another, and this program is actually is going to be taking place at the regional center, and it's part of the initiatives to address disparities throughout the state. Community Navigator program will be at family resource centers also to provide navigation for families that need support in navigating the system. Then there will be six case managers who will be taking case loads of no more than 40 families or individuals per case manager. And they will be focusing on those who have no POS. So those are some of the efforts that will be taking place. Also, the recreational services, camping, and non-medical therapies has been reestablished. And this probably will provide also opportunities for a number of individuals who use these services and therefore increase the purchase of service expenditure. We also have the self-determination program, which offers more flexibility to families. And we hope certainly that all these efforts will contribute to addressing the disparities that we have seen in these charts. But now it is time for us to hear from you. What do you think of what we have seen, what you have seen, and what are your comments, your ideas, and the solutions that you can suggest for this situation. Thank you.
So in order to answer your questions, you can either put it in the chat. There are already a number of comments in the chat, but we'll go to questions. And then if you want to raise your hand as a participant, we can also see that and address your questions as well. Let me see. There were a couple of questions about expenditures, whether they are by disability and gender, and we actually don't keep data by gender. So just so you know that. And then, let's see, I'm going to go through the questions. I see Judy has raised her hand. Arthur Lipscomb asked some questions about, it appears that RCB sends 3 times as much on white consumers as Hispanics. And I answered some of that in the chat and referred people to looking at age and living arrangements, but we'd like to hear from you if you have any comments on why that is. There is also a number of comments on ASL services and people using ASL having higher purchase of service, and it does actually make sense because of the use of interpreters. And then let me go to, since Judy has her hand up, let me unmute you. I think I can do that here. There you are. Okay, I'm going to allow you to talk, Judy. Can you unmute and speak? I think you are.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. So I also had posed some questions. I didn't realize it was only going to host some panelists. So let me get to those first, and then I do have a kind of an overarching comment question. So yeah, I was pointing out when you were presenting the slides, bar charts for the age 3 to 21, and then the remaining slides for adults. So adults is a very broad category. So adults in our mind is always, you know, anyone who's an RCB consumer beyond age 21. So that's 22 and up. And so is it possible to have that adult definition broken down even further? So maybe like a age 22 to age 30, because that would be the time when the consumer transitions out of the school system, and then to whether it be a day program, most likely a day program, transportation, group home type of thing, and then maybe by the time age 30 they would have settled into some type of adult transition program, and then from age 33 up, just how they kind of get through the remaining years of their adult life, certainly up through their more senior years, because our experience is such that we have a son who is about to hit that transition age of age 22. So we're working with our case manager to explore the different day programs, and we're finding that there's the burden is shifted pretty heavily to the families to try to identify a placement that would be appropriate for the consumer. But the thought that we had with this self-determination is there is a spending cap, right? And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here. What we're understanding is that it's really just a lump payment by regional center to the families to utilize for all of the different placements that they'll need, the services, the supports, once they age out of the school system. That we feel is a very heavy burden for the families to try to figure out, because there's a liability, there's risk, the amount of time and effort that it takes to even narrow that down.
So can I address a couple of those? And
sure.
If you, and we may not address all of them, but I hear that those interests, just so we get to everyone who has a question. But for one, whether we could break down the data a little further by age, we could do that, and we will note that as something that was an interest of people in our community. Our data systems are very complicated, so it's hard to do, but we can try to do that, especially, I think you're right about that 22 to 30 age group. And there isn't a cap on funding in self-determination. The dollars are based on what was spent the year previously. And if a person is transitioning from school district and so forth, there is a budget developed based on what would be spent in a traditional system. And then that is how the dollars are allocated, and the spending plan is based. But I encourage anyone who's interested in self-determination to attend one or two orientations, because it's very complicated. And one of how we can make that less complicated for folks is a way that I think people can choose services that they might want. But there isn't a cap. There are rates that are set by the state for the most part, and that will be increasing over the next couple of years. And that is how some of the dollars are limited, is by the rates, and those are increasing in the next couple of years. So let's see what else. Thank you, Judy. Appreciate those questions, and feel free to send us any other comments as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and then let's see. Is there anyone else with a question? Arthur, did you want to speak or ask a question and comment on anything? Arthur Lipscomb? Arthur, there you are.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to introduce myself again. I'm the Clients' Rights Advocate for Consumers of Research East Bay. Please feel to give me a call, anyone that needs help. My information is in the chat box. My number again is 510-267-1280. I did have a question about some of the data. I was noticing the percentage of spending. As the years go by, the percentage goes up so that less and less money is being spent on people. That's across the board of all ethnic groups, but white is the lowest at 25.5%, Asians the highest at 36.9%. But I understand that because of COVID, a lot of places were closed down, but also because of COVID, shouldn't more money have been spent in order to try to compensate for that? For example, giving more respite or other supports and services?
I think that the COVID question is an open one, because we did fund, continue to fund a lot of services as alternative services. However, a lot of families continue to have challenges finding respite workers, and a lot of providers had trouble actually being able to provide services because they could not hire workers. And so it's been a very, it should be analyzed a little bit more, but I think it's been, some things increased a lot and other things decreased a lot. I do remember early in the pandemic and during surges, there was a real decline in people wanting to use services because of just fears on all sorts of sides. So good question though, and maybe it calls for a little bit more deep analysis and more than what we usually report on. So thanks. Any other questions? We had a number of comments on services for people using ALS, and that many people who use ALS and who are deaf in the family home really need the interpretation because their family members are not fluent signers, and that can increase cost as well. Okay. And I did want to mention, Jairo talked about a few new initiatives that are going to be occurring, one of which is low caseloads that will focus on people with low to no purchase of service. And they will be small caseloads with the effort to make sure that people understand the regional center system and are able to access both regional center services and generic services like IHSS and those systems. And I think one of the things we have seen, even as we analyze some people with no POS, is that some of the adults in that group are working and competitive employment, and so aren't receiving any services, and at this point don't feel like they want any services. And so we'll have to look at that and keep some data as well on exactly who we target in those groups. And there's also, through the American Rescue Act funding, there's a program that's going to be piloted in the next 6 months. It'll start to really provide more of a kind of a wraparound service for people living in their family home, especially adults, that would help people coordinate services so families wouldn't have the same burden on doing that, especially as parents age. So we're looking forward to those things being rolled out and as we move forward. So sorry for all my talking, but if anyone wants to raise their hand, we still have a minute or two. But Jairo, anything else?
No, I think you know, if there is additional comments, Michi has placed the link and how you can contact us, and we're always open to, it doesn't have to be during the month of March, and it doesn't have to be in this meeting. We always welcome inputs, you know, feedback, experiences, and things that help all of us to improve our services. You're muted.
We'll close now. And Judy, if you want to put your email in the chat, she's asking what the denial rate is for purchase of service. And I don't think we don't keep a data on that, but we can get back with you on just where we look. We have posted on DDS's website. There is information about fair hearings and people who've appealed. And that's where you would really find that as we give notices of action and so forth. So thank you, and look forward to being in person maybe next year for this meeting, which would be a lot more fun. So thanks.
Thank you.